to the discussion on telepractice. My name is Rani Dipley. I'm an early intervention practitioner. I have worked as a CEO of early childhood intervention services in the past. At the moment, I'm working as a consultant at Plumtree with some of the team on research and service improvement projects. I'm delighted this afternoon to introduce Lorraine Heywood, who is going to talk to us about her research on telepractice. Lorraine has many years of experience working in disability at New South Wales Department of Ageing, Disability and Home Care. She worked on policy and service development. Most recently, Lorraine worked at ECIA, helping ECI services transition to the NDIS. At present, Lorraine is looking after her young daughter while completing her master's in evaluation. As someone who's passionate about the well-being of young children and families, Lorraine has been conducting research on telepractice in early childhood intervention. Lorraine, this year, because of COVID, suddenly everyone is online. But telepractice is not new. It's been used for a while, and there's a growing body of evidence. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rani. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference today and for the introduction. Yes, the literature supports the use of telepractice for a wide variety of multidisciplinary early childhood interventions, including speech pathologist, occupational therapist, psychologist, and special educator roles. And some services overseas and in Australia have been using telepractice for a number of years. As you were saying, I've recently undertaken research on the literature in this area during my studies for a Masters of Evaluation. And I think it's important for me to say that I've undertaken this research on a voluntary basis. So on my own behalf, for an assignment that I've done for my Masters. I've known Silvana and Rani for many years, and I've shared what I found in the literature with Plumtree. And at Silvana's request, I'm now sharing it with all of you attending today. So I'll just give you some background to what I did. I started with a search for journal articles written by researchers working in the telepractice field. And I used the search terms of child, family, disability, allied health, early intervention, therapy, and tele. I got a total of 319 results relating to articles written in English in the last 5 years. The most relevant results were then selected for full review. And to be selected, I used a process where I said that the research needed to have been completed. It needed to be about children aged up to 8 years old, so not adults. It needed to be relevant, so disability focused and family-centered practice focused, and solely about tele-delivery. In total, I reviewed 11 articles, all of which were written in the last 2 years, and all of this research relates to telepractice that was already taking place before COVID-19 emerged. And there's certainly been an increase in the amount of research that's been undertaken in this area over the last couple of years, and I think that this is only going to increase further as so many services have switched to telepractice delivery due to COVID-19.
Elaine, one thing identified in the literature is the journey of acceptance. Can you tell us what this means for families and professionals?
Yes. The journey to acceptance of telepractice is a term used in a study by Hines et al. From 2019. And this study used mixed methods to undertake in-depth research into telepractice services received by 4 children with disabilities and their families who were living in rural New South Wales. And all these children had individual funded packages under the NDIS. So the journey for the families starts from families not often having had any experience with telepractice and being unsure about its suitability for their family and for their child. And they move through to their belief in it being strengthened by their experience of the telepractice service. And at the point of acceptance, the families felt that they would continue to use telepractice even when or if other services became available. It's important to say here that the study outlines that these families were motivated to try the telepractice service as they had few alternatives. They were in rural locations, and it also facilitated access to timely and regular therapy for them. When I've mentioned the journey to acceptance of telepractice to allied health professionals, some of them have themselves identified that there's a similar journey to acceptance for some therapists. There's evidence of this in the research literature. Some research identifies that therapists can be reluctant to deliver telepractice, and some have assumed that families may have a negative attitude to using telepractice and that it's less personal. And others may see that there's limitations relating to goals that may require physical interaction. So I think it's interesting really to think that there's a journey of acceptance for families, and that there's also possibly a journey of acceptance for practitioners. The journey of acceptance is one of 5 interrelated themes that emerged from participant interviews that Hines et al. Did. Just wanted to give you the other themes. They were that it's consistent with person-centered practice. So for example, you can hold sessions in familiar environments at the best time and fit with routines. There's a relationship-based nature of telepractice, and the study found telepractice was effective in building therapeutic relationships with children. The technology is a vehicle for the service delivery, and they found that parents were able to develop basic proficiency and confidence in using the technology, and also the importance of having skilled allied health professionals. And in terms of these skills, they found the skills needed to be successful at telepractice were very common to those that were needed for in-person delivery. Particularly communication and collaboration skills were important, followed by preparedness and flexibility.
Lorraine, you talked a little bit about some of the benefits and challenges of telepractice. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the literature says about positive benefits of telepractice?
Yeah, some of the positive benefits centre on compatibility with everyday life and family-centred practice. And these include convenience, so there's less travel, that can give increased accessibility and flexibility. It enables service delivery in the event of an illness. You don't have to cancel the appointment, you could still do the appointment if one family member is not well. There's also more happening in the natural environment. It fits with the natural environment, with children's context, their routines and family situations, and showed how things can be done at home, and telepractice helped with that. There's also an ability to have visits during a family's typical routine. So one example in some research was the use of the iPad at the dinner table. That way, a allied health professional could view the situation the family was in and how things were happening within the dinner routine for the child, and that could be used as a telepractice session. And also in one study, there was access to therapy whilst on holiday, which was quite good for that family. And there was also increased sibling inclusion. Other benefits relate to engagement. In some studies, some parents have reported that the child engaged on a deeper level via telepractice, and that some video conferencing functions were inherently motivating to some children. Other researchers reported that families have felt that telepractice enables greater family engagement in early intervention, particularly through the facilitation of parent training. So for example, you may be able to record sessions and then play them to different family members so that they can also see what the impact could be of an intervention. And also there's a view that telepractice can help in improving communication between therapists and families. Additionally, telepractice can help build an enhanced level of family-centeredness. And it can help family members, for example, join Zoom sessions where they may not have previously been able to come to an in-person session. And it can increase confidence in using intervention techniques as well. And just finally on this, telepractice generally has resulted in fewer missed sessions, decreases in financial burdens on families and providers, and better continuity of care. And it's also provided those in rural areas with timely, low-cost options that give them access to allied health professionals.
So what are some challenges of telepractice and how can these be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few challenges for some families and services outlined in the research. Some families with no telepractice experience report a definite preference for in-person visits versus telepractice. However, they do recognise the benefit of telepractice in facilitating communication with early intervention professionals and reaching underserved families. But I think it's interesting, there's an interesting challenge for providers in that families that haven't experienced family-centred practice may be more reluctant to use telepractice. And I think the key here seems to be assisting families to understand the purpose of early intervention. One research study, particularly Yang et al. In 2019, suggests that materials explaining the purpose of early intervention and discussion of different methods of telepractice may help address this perception. Technology is a potential challenge for several reasons. The research reports of perceptions that children just won't concentrate or enjoy the telepractice session. There's evidence in the research that some children do engage on a deeper level through technology. And I think the key here is that therapists need to work to outline how technology can be used, and that telepractice doesn't have to be sitting in front of a camera. It can be playing games, it can be families filming something on their phone and sharing that with a therapist. Other technology concerns relate to access to technology, and that includes the internet. So in terms of both data speed and data availability. Now I understand there's some support available through the NDIS on this, but it could still be a challenge in some contexts. And there's also a need for providers to have training to facilitate child participation online and to ensure that children can participate. A connected challenge is finding a place to hold the telepractice session, particularly for families. One study, the local library was used unsuccessfully, but I think this can be addressed through using the child's natural environment, so the home or maybe childcare centre, but there does need to be technological access to enable that to happen. There are also some perceptions that there will be inferior client-provider relationships and that the lack of physical touch means that some assessments and hands-on activities can't be undertaken. I think we need more research on this. There's certainly evidence in the research that some assessments can be undertaken as well by telepractice. And I think this also goes back to the purpose of early intervention and working with families through coaching to build their ability and confidence in providing interventions.
And beyond COVID, what do you think is the role of telepractice in early childhood intervention?
I'd say that there's a continued role for telepractice in early childhood intervention beyond COVID, and that's supported by the research that was undertaken prior to the pandemic. It may not suit all families, but many families have experienced increased flexibility and access to services through telepractice, despite some being initially reluctant to try it. Telepractice can assist in building collaborative relationships with families and educators, teachers. It also supports family coaching practices. And I think that's a key benefit for the future of early childhood intervention because providers can't revert to hands-on clinical model. They need to do more of a coaching approach. Some researchers state telepractice shouldn't replace in-person services and that parents may prefer a blended or a hybrid model. In one study, participants felt that telepractice was no different to in-person sessions, but others felt that rapport with the therapist could be improved with at least one in-person sessions. I think there's considerations that need to be made about that. In the research, there is talk about it being important to develop materials and practices to inform families about telepractice, and about providers needing to really invest in staff training and support to build a competent telepractice team. And there are suggestions about what that training could involve, using rewards, attention holding, monitoring engagement to enable child participation, and also identifying alternatives to physical touch. I also think it's important for services that have switched to offering telepractice services to examine whether there are any unintended consequences of the switch. For example, examining the demographic profile of families accessing services to see if any groups are not accessing services, and also there are some safety considerations. But generally, the literature I looked at calls for more research on this area, and there are clear signs that further research is being undertaken by several Australian universities and professional member organisations such as Speech Pathology Australia. And I think it would be good if the research could consider if those living in closer proximity to services see sustained benefits of telepractice. I think it's also important that the research separates out the process outcomes from clinical outcomes, and separates out the effects of the medium of service delivery. So by this I mean more comparisons between those who are accessing the same family-centred practice service via different modes of delivery, as telepractice and in-person services become more possible once the pandemic, hopefully, is under more control. And just finally, research that has made that comparison has found that the mode of delivery, so whether that's telepractice or in person, wasn't related to things like perceptions of parental belief in own ability or involvement in the early intervention sessions. And I think, post-COVID, we need more research around this. And just finally, I'd say my hope is that the outcomes of the increased use of telepractice due to COVID-19 are increased choice and access to services, children and their families, increased flexibility, and reduced travel and cancellation costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine, for sharing your findings with us this afternoon.